effortlessly, well, maybe not effortlessly, be effortlessly. Wow, that was a hard one to say. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new, and not just brand new, but probably the best episode of the Magus Brothers podcast, and we'll tell you why. But I am Tyler, and with me, as always...
Hey, y'all, I'm Feyerbrand, and I don't have anything to say to make fun of Tyler today, so we will just continue on.
Thank God. So, before we dive into why this episode is going to be the best, tell me about your week, Feyer. How's it been going?
My week has been terrible. My counterpart at work, he took 2.5 weeks leave. And while I support everybody taking their paid time off and not being at work, treat yourself. Well, him and I usually cover 4 people's amount of work normally, just the 2 of us.
Government work, am I right?
Dude, it's bad. So with him gone, I am solo covering roughly 4 people's amount of work. So I have been busy. I have been stressed. I am tired. It is awful. But now we are here to talk about Final Fantasy. So it's our weeks always seem to end good because a good week is a week with Final Fantasy.
And we are blessed. It is a lot of Final Fantasy going on. So there, at least right now, seems to be something to look forward to every week. I mean, from where we're recording right now, next week is Intergrade, so we're going to get some of that PS5 upgrade, some Yuffie DLC, and then while we're actively probably still playing it, E3's happening, and we are expecting, fingers crossed, some Final Fantasy news, whether that's the... I personally doubt we're going to see anything Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 news-wise because they just released Intermission. It's too soon.
And there's too much other stuff.
Yeah.
It's not like this is the only game in town.
Yeah, I do expect a Final Fantasy 16 update. Fingers crossed. I would love to see it. Very hyped for that game. And then I'm expecting maybe something for Final Fantasy 14, but I can't imagine what new stuff they would give us this close after FanFest. So, I don't know. They'll probably have it there, but I don't know what would be there as far as new things. But then we've got some rumors about a new Final Fantasy game that's supposed to be announced. But I really don't want to dive into all those rumors and speculations. But I'm hoping for some good for some Final Fantasy.
Yeah, and rumors are vicious and they're difficult. So, yeah, let's not speculate. But we did skip something. You didn't tell us how your week is.
Oh, man. So the week has mostly been pretty good. Work has calmed down, and I've got some time off next week. I've got a 4-day weekend to enjoy some of that intermission. And this week was only a 4-day week because of the holiday weekend we had for Memorial Day. But we had kind of a little sudden heat wave spike, and it's been super hot up here where I live. It's only hot for 3 days out of the year, so most homes don't have... Yeah, I know. It's weird complaining about it when you live somewhere like Arizona, as hot as it is.
Yes.
But air conditioning is standard, even in the worst places for you. And air conditioning up here is not standard. Luckily, we got a window AC unit set up, but we have a big house and we have old storm windows, and modern day AC units don't fit in the windows properly. It's a whole thing. But we basically certain parts of the house, even where I'm recording, is a nice 80-something degrees. Just, I think did I send you a picture of the thermostat? It was 83, 85 or something like that.
Yeah, right in that range, dude. And I cringed pretty hard. If I ever move there, I will be putting central air conditioning into my house. Yeah. I refuse, especially after living in Arizona for the majority of my life. It was in the high 90s today, and we're today's pretty nice outside. And it's only, what? Oh, we're in June.
Just broke into it.
Oh, no, it's supposed to be gross right now.
Yeah, it's a humid heat here. So it was I took a shower today and then stepped out of the shower and dried off. And it was one of those, no matter how much I dried off, I still felt like I was wet from the shower,
Ugh, that's the worst.
But enough about that. It's not that bad.
Yes, it is.
Good stuff to look forward to. And we've got a great episode to talk about.
So you could say next week's going to be a lot cooler.
Oh, yeah. And it is.
That was a terrible joke.
Next week is not only going to be cooler Final Fantasy-wise, but the temperature is coming down starting tomorrow, and we're going to dip below into those mid 70s and then back into the 60s. It's weird weather here. I'll never get used to it.
Thank you for over-explaining my terrible joke. I can always count on you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. They don't know. They don't know what our weather's like. I got to explain it. But anyway, circling back to why this episode is going to be great. This episode, we are spending the entire time talking about Final Fantasy VII, and specifically, hopefully, mostly about the Final Fantasy VII OG 1997. We're going to try to self-contain it, because Final Fantasy VII expanded. There's compilation. There's Dirge of Cerberus, Before Crisis, Crisis Core, the books, now remake. Final Fantasy VII has really exploded, but we're really going to try and talk about that original game and what made it so special for us and why it is our favorite Final Fantasy.
Yeah, we're just fanboys.
Yeah.
We'll defend it till we die.
Yeah.
We're those guys.
I mean, and for the most part,
no shame.
I feel like we don't really have to defend it because while everyone has their own favorite Final Fantasy, which is completely understandable with a game of 15 mainline titles and so many spin-offs and sequels and all of that, Final Fantasy VII, I think I mentioned in another episode of all the Final Fantasies, it is the Final Fantasy VII that has made its stamp on popular culture. It is the one, you see Sephiroth, you see Cloud. A lot of people know those characters, even if they're not familiar with the game. Those are the characters that made it into Super Smash Brothers. Final Fantasy VII is the big one, and regardless of whether it's your favorite, regardless of whether people go back and forth on whether it's truly the best game of the entire series, Final Fantasy VII put Final Fantasy on the map in a way that no other game had before.
Oh, for sure, man. It's like a cultural icon within the gaming world, and in my opinion, helped shape an entire generation of gamers. Mm-hmm. People our age, we're in our early 30s, going on mid 30s. But, normally when you talk to RPG players like us and around our age group, it usually drills down to 7. It's somewhere there in the beginning, normally. And it just really helped shape a whole entire generation of gamers and their tastes and their expectations of other games, and how nothing has ever quite lived up to 7. And so we have led depressing lives, and we're sad most of the time because nothing else lives up to it. We're constantly searching. We are on a quest or an odyssey of sorts to find a game.
Nice plug.
To find a game that we enjoyed as much.
Yeah, and not only that, but Final Fantasy VII is one of the, I don't want to say the game, but is one of the games that sold PlayStations. Because primarily before PlayStation came out, I'd have to go research some of these statistics, kind of back it up, but even Final Fantasy before 7 was on Nintendo. Nintendo was the big player back then, and Nintendo is still a big player. I'm certainly not discrediting what they do in the gaming world, but it was a much different landscape back then. And Final Fantasy VII was one of the games that sold to PlayStation. And, I think I remember reading or watching in a video, but basically Square Enix, back then it was Squaresoft, right? They weren't Square Enix yet at that point. It was just Squaresoft.
Correct. Yes.
Squaresoft wanted to make bigger, better, bolder games, but there were limitations with the Nintendo because the Nintendo was still pumping out cartridges back then. I mean, they still do cartridges. And
get with the times.
They wanted to go to the CD-ROM for bigger story, more data, and Nintendo just wasn't up on it, and they moved over to the PlayStation for more freedom, better storytelling, et cetera, et cetera. And that freedom for them paid off in big ways. And even then, the game was so big that it went from a cartridge to Final Fantasy VII had 3 discs.
Yeah,
and then
man.
Final Fantasy VIII afterward had 4.
Blew my mind when I saw a 3-disc game coming off Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah.
And Die Hard games.
Yeah, it was definitely a different environment back then, but like I said, paid off and was fantastic. So without going into the history of consoles and Squaresoft and all of that, let's dive into Final Fantasy VII. Give me a quick overview of some of that plot. How do we start off?
Okay, so You want an overview of the plot? Wow, I could talk plot for hours, but oh man, where do you start? I guess do you start from the beginning of the game, or do you start from the beginning of Cloud, because it all unfolds
as the player playing 7? Give me like the back synopsis. Don't do the whole game, but give me the back synopsis.
Well, you start out as, you're a mercenary now. You used to work for this giant evil corporation, not unlike a lot of the corporations in the world today.
Let's take a quick pause. Out of our big corporations, which one do you think is most likely to become Shinra?
Oh, I don't know. I've been honestly thinking on this question a lot, and it's because I wanted to ask Haney on First Encounter what he thought it was. But I don't know, because corporations have such good PR, like damage control, to the point where you really don't know how evil they are, because you're not seeing the underbelly of them like we see the underbelly of Shinra. So, us as people here in reality, we're seeing what all the citizens of Midgar and everywhere across Gaia is seeing, where they're like, oh yeah, Mako energy is great, let's continue to use it. And that's who we are. And sure, we can see some of these companies are garbage in real life, and they suck and all that, but we don't really know the full extent of it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly...
Nestle, dude. Don't they steal water?
I think they do. I don't even know if Nestle is owned, because you get those whole, you got that big parent company, but they break up into small ones or whatever. And I don't even know if Nestle is the big one.
I don't think it is either. I don't really know. I'm just talking out of my butt.
Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Disney, one of those. Those are the big ones here in America, I feel, those big corporations. But yeah, in 7, they do kind of, what's the word? They present this world and the corporation to us, and they do kind of talk in pretty heavy extremes, for what it's doing. And yeah, it is shown in game. You as the main character, you're fighting this corporation head on, so you get to see that bad side. But, you talk to plenty of NPCs throughout the game who are sympathetic and talk about the improvement of the world and what Mako energy has done and what Shinra has done for us, So, yeah, but we went off on a tangent there. I was trying to make a joke and we got real serious. But finish telling me you're a mercenary.
This is what we do.
It is what we do. I'm not even going to apologize.
You're a mercenary. You get hired by one of your childhood acquaintances and her group to go be an eco-terrorist to take down said company.
Acquaintances? Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge.
Well, I mean, it's really within the context of the original. I don't feel that I personally got too great of an idea of what the relationship was like when they were kids. Because when you first see it, it kind of seems like Cloud is the unpopular kid and Tifa's group is the group of popular kids. And he's trying to go and join it, but they're telling him no. But then it also spins on its head where, he was kind of forcing himself to be an outcast because he wanted to, pity himself or whatever. And it's were they friends? They obviously weren't best friends. I guess it was just sort of these are all the neighborhood kids, and Cloud was one of them, and he knew Tifa, and they kind of played together. And,
and
he tried to save her on Mount Nebel.
That level of nuance and depth, you don't even find that out for a while. In the beginning, you really do think they're best friends. Barrett talks about them as childhood friends, and Tifa plays up this promise, and you get this flashback to the well and stuff like that. And, Cloud's like, yeah. But
yeah, and they had the promise.
So you do think they're best friends in the beginning.
You do. And I think the big thing that pushes that narrative is you see the promise scene at the well in Nibelheim. And why would Cloud call somebody there to tell them that he was leaving unless they were either oh, he has a crush on her, so that's who he wants to tell us information to, or they're, close friends. That's the idea it gives you, the game gives you from that scene. And you're like, okay, these maybe they were kind of romantically interested in each other. Maybe they were just really close friends.
Yeah, however much romantic you can be at that age.
Let me tell you this, as somebody with an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 14-year-old, boyfriends and girlfriends and, romantic interests are something that cross these children's minds.
Oh, yeah, I believe it. But yeah, so best friends, gets him involved in the job and some eco-terrorism.
Yeah, this straight up, this is terrorism. They are attempting to use fear and destruction to push their political agenda. There's no two ways about it. They are terrorists. Even if we side with them because we believe it's a good cause, still is terrorism. But, we go on some successful missions, some unsuccessful missions. We get blown up. We meet some slum drunk flower girl.
In-game joke.
Sorry. I had to throw that in there because I played a mod where you picked your class for every character in 7, and one of them was the slum drunk for Aerith. So it's a fun mod. It's called New Threat. Go play it. It's like a whole new game. Anyways, we're not going off on tangents.
Yes, we are. Give me the wheel. But
so then we meet her, and she's. I don't like Aerith.
Oh,
if you want to talk about her and further on, I don't like Aerith.
Final Fantasy VII is our favorite game, but you will very quickly find out we have very different opinions on the game itself.
Very different.
But anyway, Aerith is fantastic. Aerith is one of my favorite characters, personally. You find out that she's got secrets and secrets that will very integral to the plot and things we will slowly find out about her. But before I dive into her, I kind of want to point out some of the differences between Aerith is the healer of the group, of the story. All of her limit breaks revolve around healing. She's the flower girl. She's very in tune with nature. And stereotypically, even to this day, having characters like that brings a certain preconceived notions to it. I get kind of like this pure, kind of holy type character, and they're very reserved, kind of timid, and those tropes happen a lot in anime and other video games. But Aerith is funny and makes a lot of jokes, and she's flirty, and she's got sass, and it's very, very not what you would expect, especially in 1997, and even she dresses. She's got the dress, and she does a staff, and she's got this kind of priestly vibe, but she's very emotionally intelligent, empathetic, reads the room for the most part pretty well. There's a beat or two where, and I don't know if it's translation errors, but she fumbles the ball real hard in Final Fantasy VII in a funny way. But she's very emotionally.
What scene are you talking about?
There's the scene in Gold Saucer where right when you get there, Barrett's just realized, or not realized, but you've just learned that Barrett caused the destruction of Mount Coral and stuff like that. And then when the party's standing there in the lobby of the Gold Saucer.
Oh, and she's like, oh, we're going to go play. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, why don't you just get over it? We're going to go play games. And it's just like, Aerith.
I know she follows that up with, she says, oh, this is just how you have to act in this kind of situation. You just kind of act normal. And I feel like that was just portrayed poorly within the limitations of the game, as well as the Western translation. And I feel like that scene is going to come across a lot better when we eventually see it in the remake.
Oh, for sure.
But we're not talking about the remake.
But yeah, so there's a lot about Aerith that I feel like takes that trope about that particular archetype of character and kind of turns it up on its head. And then we have Tifa, who's the other very prominent female protagonist of the game. We still have Yuffie, but Yuffie was optional. Aerith and Tifa are the main two, I'm going to say. But Tifa is the brawler. She beats the crap out of things with her fists and her feet, and she's a very amazing martial artist. You can dress however you want to, especially in a video game. And I'm certainly not trying to comment on any of that part, but she is not in a dress. She's got very short shorts. She's got her midriff showing and her arms exposed. She's dressing. She's showing off her assets quite a bit more than what Aerith is what I'm trying to say. And I'm not trying to pass any judgment on that. Much power to Tifa. But Tifa is quiet. Tifa is very timid. Tifa spends most of the story actually not saying things that she should be saying, and she has difficulties talking to Cloud as her friend because of the history they have, and Tifa struggles with that a lot, to the point to where, had she acted earlier, she maybe could have helped Cloud a lot sooner than what she does. And it's interesting because not just in the way she dresses, but the way she fights and all of that, I would expect that type of behavior with Aerith. and Aerith with Tifa, with the tropes that we see in television and anime and our media, but Final Fantasy VII very quickly establishes these characters as wildly different, and it's great, and it works. But so, yeah, the party meets up with Aerith, or initially it's just Cloud, not even the party, and you kind of get wrapped up in Aerith, and she is coming off mysterious, and she's got some secrets, and, very quickly, the story accelerates, and we get to quite a very intense head-on with Shinra, the mega corporation that is now the government, and has their own military, and it's basically very obviously, and it cracks me up because there's those people who say Final Fantasy is not political. Keep your politics out of Final Fantasy, and it's very, very apparent if you're even remotely paying attention that Final Fantasy VII has a lot to say on politics.
A lot.
And, we're not going to dive into our own political beliefs per se on this, but Final Fantasy VII has a message. This is a game that came out in 1997, and you're initially fighting a gigantic megacorporation that has turned into a government on its own and is literally sucking Mako, which is the planet's life energy, to generate power. And very much later in the game, you find out that Mako is the life stream, and the life stream is made up of literal souls, the essence of people returning to the planet. So you have this corporation knowingly burning human souls to create electricity for the people. And then you've got this class system within the city of Midgar itself. You've got the rich on the upper plate.
That's so metal, like when you think about it.
Yeah, isn't it? You've got the rich on the upper plate, and then you've got the poor in the slums who are stuck down there. And you've got the message about, the planet's resources, the Mako. You've got this planet and this environmental message behind it, and the corporations. Final Fantasy VII has a lot to say that is very politically driven, and it's not even subtle.
No, it's very much in your face from the very first mission when you get off that train and they're like, hey, let's go blow up this thing because these people suck. It's incredibly in your face throughout the majority of the game, kind of until, your mission switches from, hey, let's take down this corporation Shinra, and more to let's go kill this super powerful dude who wants to destroy the planet and become a literal god. And it's very political up until that point. And even then, you still, like, your second to last dungeon, so to say, of the game is returning to Midgar to go and finally wipe out Shinra. And, like, let's just deal with these guys now. So, like, that political thing's throughout the whole game.
And it doesn't even just stop there, because if you think about it, while, yeah, the mission does, it kind of transitioned to where it's Shinra being the forefront, and then it turns to Sephiroth. It's not even that big of a tonal change, because it's not like just Sephiroth comes out of the blue. Sephiroth is the way he is because of Shinra. Like,
oh, that's true.
Sephiroth is an experiment from Shinra. He is the holy grail that Shinra was aiming for. It's not bad enough that Shinra's just sucking the lifeblood of the planet. They're in here experimenting on people, making monsters. Sephiroth is the result of a human experiment made with cells from an alien that crashed into the planet 2,000 years ago. So you are the entire game dealing with the consequences and fallout of this awful megacorporation.
Yeah, like the more you think about it, like literally every event in 7 happened because of Shinra. Sephiroth would not be who he is if Shinra had not, experimented on him as he was still in the womb, and he could have just been a totally normal person. But no, they had to interfere and do their weird stuff. Yeah, like just them being garbage, I guess, drove the entire story, even all the little subparts.
Yeah, and, I want to take a break kind of talking from Shinra, and I do want to kind of transition to Sephiroth. Sephiroth is, I don't know about you, but there's a lot of debate. I mean, there's a lot of debate on any topic in the Final Fantasy community once you bring it up. But a lot goes around talking about like the best villain in the franchise. And I think if I had to pick, I think the most popular votes would be Sephiroth, Kefka, and Emmett Selk from 14. I feel like those are like probably now. I do see a lot of Arden from 15. I feel like but I feel like people often fight between Kefka and Sephiroth being the best villains. And I can already tell by the look on your face that you've got like opinions about this, as do I. Hit me with it.
I would say the majority of the community is generally in constant argument over those three. Maybe even, as you said, throw in Arden from 15, because he actually is an incredible villain. It's hard to say who's the best villain, in my opinion, because each game's so different that villain is obviously perfect for that game. And I don't know if I could pick one to say this one is better than this one overall. However, I will say that Kefka is probably like the worst villain out of all of them because like you're just a clown. Like maybe I need to replay 6 and I'm going to go off on a 10-second tangent, but maybe I need to replay 6, but this dude's just a clown. And I don't care that he destroyed the world because he's still lost. And if you destroy the world, you should win. In rant. Anyways, I don't know if I have a favorite.
Destroying the world is not a personality trait.
Right?
Now, Kefka to me, you know, I feel like, and I think maybe you've seen this argument, but like one of the things I dislike about The Shining, the actual movie, is that The Shining is supposed to be a story about like this good man and his descent into madness, at least in the book it is, and going crazy. Whereas if you watch the movie, it's a movie about Jack Nicholson already looking crazy and like seeming crazy because it's Jack Nicholson. And then he just gets crazier throughout the movie. And I feel like that's what Kefka is. You've got this crazy clown who's already crazy. And then like he just gets crazier. And to me, I like Sephiroth because we get to see him. And while he does come off kind of cold and aloof, and it does get expanded upon in Crisis Core, which I don't want to go too deep into, Sephiroth was a good person, and he finds out about his history and past and all of these things, and it blows up in his face, and he snaps and goes crazy, and it's sad, and you watch it, and it's brutal, and I don't know. I feel for Sephiroth. It doesn't excuse any of the awful things he does, but damn, do you get to see what happened to him to cause this awful descent. Not to mention the fire in Nibelheim, which I feel like you say Nibelheim and I say Nibelheim.
I say Nibelheim. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Neither do I. It's like,
dude, I'm the guy who used to pronounce chocobo as chocobo.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen that video, but it's like them arguing over how things are pronounced, and it's like, is it Tifa or Tifa?
I used to say Tifa too.
And then it's like, is it Bahamut?
It's Bahamut.
Is it Bahamut or Bahamut? And like they just like go back and forth the whole video.
I'll argue Bahamut till my deathbed. But according to the livestream.net, it's pronounced Nibelheim. Like you're nibbling on something.
Oh, is it? Oh, well.
I googled it. It's nibble.
All right.
Like you're a little nibbler. Anyways,
nibble.
Back onto the topic of Sephiroth. Sephiroth, as you were explaining, is such a tragic villain. And it does, I don't know if the OG, because all of my knowledge now of 7 is so saturated from the entire compilation that I can't exactly remember what memory I have is from what piece of media, but I feel they do an incredible job of explaining and showing us why Sephiroth is the way he is. And to the point where there's a lot of people out there who agree with him. Like, they think that his actions aren't necessarily justified, but they're like, yeah, I totally get that. And who knows, maybe I would have reacted the same way if I was the victim of these same exact circumstances. And I think that marks a good villain when you as the viewer or the consumer can be like, dude, I totally understand. Like, maybe I would act this exact same way. And not only does that mark a good villain, that marks like incredible storytelling, and incredible character writing. And they just made like a really amazing arc for Sephiroth because, we did see how he was, as you said, like aloof and cold and all that, but that doesn't make him a bad person. Just because you're cold and aloof, that doesn't mean anything about who you are as a person. And that's kind of how he was, in the Nibelheim flashback towards quote unquote Cloud. And, there was nothing in there in the beginning of that flashback that you were like, oh yeah, this is a bad guy. At first you're like, oh, he seems like a good dude. He's just quiet and he's carrying out his mission. And then as that goes on, and while it was done quickly, and I wish it would have expanded upon more when he was reading all of the information in the Shinra mansion, you just sort of see him like snap because he's learning, the truth of his origins. And even if he got some of the facts wrong, like, he thought he was a Cetra and he's not, the overall feeling and the realization that he's literally just the result of an experiment of some whacked out scientist, I think that would kind of make anybody go, lose it at least for a little bit. I don't know about burning down an entire village and murdering everybody in it. Kind of crazy, but, considering he was born and bred to be a super soldier, maybe that's all he knows is killing. And again, that is a result of Shinra and their interference in his life.
Yeah, I think you summed it up very well there. But Sephiroth is a very tragic villain. But on top of him being a tragic villain,
yeah, he's hot.
They also made him just look super, super cool. He's got the long hair. He looks awesome. He's got that 8-foot Masamune going on. So, he looks cool. He's an imposing villain, and not just in his story, but through the gameplay mechanics. You first meet Sephiroth, and you're fighting alongside him, and he kills this dragon in like 2 hits, and you do like 14 damage on top of it. It's like, and he does over 3,000. They show you through the gameplay that Sephiroth is this unstoppable
You just feel
force.
That raw power.
Yeah, and like even before then, you spend the majority, like first 8 hours of the game, like an entire, like that, all of that Midgar section, and you don't even really hear about Sephiroth until the end of it. And it's got this whole like Jaws motif to it, to where it's like there's this shark under the water and people are dying and all of this fear is going on, but you don't even see the shark until way later. And the creators even reference how they were inspired by Jaws with Sephiroth. It's just great, so like
I never thought of it like that, like as the Jaws thing.
Yeah, like they full on like pulled inspiration from Jaws.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's just they do such a good job building that tension with Sephiroth. And again, I don't want to talk about the remake too much, but like people talked about how Sephiroth was in it too much early on and how it wasn't like that in the original. And I just, no matter how I break it down, I'm like, you can't recreate that tension that they did in the 1997 version. Like,
yeah, it doesn't exist.
Sephiroth is too pervasive in pop culture. Like you can't make that tension again. That was just a perfect blend back then.
Yeah, he was an unknown character back in the original where nobody knew who he was. But now, like, dudes in Smash, Kingdom Hearts, countless mods of other games. Final Fantasy VII I would say is probably one of the top games to be modded into other games, to where, like character models and weapons and stuff. And Cloud and Sephiroth are usually the 2 key characters to get modded into other things. So even if you've never even heard of Final Fantasy VII, but you're playing Skyrim, all of a sudden you see what's a Buster Sword as a mod. Like Final Fantasy VII, it's just the cultural impact from the original. Even if the remake didn't happen, the cultural impact from the original is still being felt in games today. And granted, it's majority of it is all, fan-based mod creations. It's just insane how long, 24 years later, that this game is impacting gaming overall.
Yeah, Sephiroth, I don't know. Sephiroth is just my favorite. He is fantastic and is personally my favorite villain. And I think you did say, every villain is great within the context of his own games, and we certainly don't want to, it's hard to pick favorites, but Sephiroth is personally my favorite villain, and a lot of it could be nostalgia, and we're not here to be unbiased. This is our favorite game for a reason, but Sephiroth is just so great. I don't know. I love him. And not just that, but I love the tie to Jenova. I think Jenova is cool. Jenova is one of those things where Final Fantasy VII has got this whole like cyberpunk thing going on and kind of steampunky cyberpunk going on. And it is very much, especially in comparison to Final Fantasy 1 through 6, there's a lot of reality pulled into Final Fantasy 7. But then you're just like, oh, this alien crash landed onto the planet 2,000 years ago. And Genova's basically the thing, like assimilating people and turning into people.
It even landed in the north, didn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know if that was intentional where they pulled inspiration from the thing, but like Genova even has this whole appearance of like this flesh monster with like tentacles and stuff like that. It impersonates other people, and it's like really creepy. Like I had never played a game, and you know, Final Fantasy is kind of brushed up against horror, and I know we talk about this in another episode, but like Final Fantasy VII, I wouldn't even say brushing up against horror. Like you have a whole segment where you're following a big old trail of blood through Shinra headquarters, and you know, you get the creepy music going on, and you've got this like flesh monster that's crash landed that was being experimented on. Like Final Fantasy VII does a good job of just being like, we're going right into the deep side of horror for a little bit. It's great. I love Genova.
And like, speaking of that scene you brought up of the following that blood trail in the Shinra HQ, that where like, you know, you're going to sleep in this prison cell and then you wake up and immediately the tone feels different immediately. And I think that's something that the game does really well. And another time that immediately springs to mind where they do that is at the end of the first disc with your girl Aerith and her death, where the cutscene starts and there's no music whatsoever. It's completely silent. It's just sort of, hear the wah sound as Sephiroth descends down, and the silence as the sword slices through, and you hear the slice, and then her materia pops out, and you just sort of watch it, and it's silent, and you're not breathing the first time you see the scene. You're holding your breath, and it just slowly falls through the air, and then tink. And then the music starts, and it's like, still to this day, every time I watch that scene, just like how well that scene was put together still just blows my mind of how they set the tone. And then following that into the next boss battle, where I know a lot of people weren't prepared for, and you're just thrown into this battle. You just had, back in 1997, probably the biggest gaming twist ever to happen. And then you're thrown into this boss battle. You're still trying to recover from the shock of watching her get absolutely speared. And that music is still playing on top of this boss battle. And, it's not your usual boss music where you're getting amped up, ready to kick some butt. No, it's this sad, melancholic music. And 7 is so good at like spinning on its heels to change the entire tone perfectly. And a big piece of that is how absolutely incredible the music is, and the writing and the way they pieced the scenes together with that music to time it all so perfectly. And it's a chef's kiss. It's amazing. It's so good. Still to this day, these scenes like leave me in awe that I'm still so amazed by them 24 years later.
So, first of all, I'm getting a little moved by you describing that scene, because that scene is powerful, and I just was visualizing it the whole time. But
it's so powerful, man. It's so powerful. And that's why it's our favorite game. 24 years later, we are still being affected by this scene and its raw power. Oh, it's so good.
It's our favorite game because Aerith dies.
Yes, she dies. That's why it's my favorite.
But how dare you just go into that scene without preparing me that we were about to talk about this? Because wow. But yes, Final Fantasy VII is a great game, but honestly, I feel like part of its staying power has to be its unabashed, just like, we're going to take this amazing character, regardless of whether you dislike Aerith. Aerith is a powerful character, not just in her healing, which, at some point you get so strong in the game that doesn't matter. But her healing and her presence in the game is powerful. Like, if whatever equipment was on her when she dies, it's gone. when she's gone, it's not like, oh, you get that back. Like, nope, you don't.
Which didn't make sense. Just like take it off her corpse.
Right. But if you were relying on that healing, your party healer is gone. And so they make it hurt even within the mechanics of the game, which again is fantastic. But really, when I think about games back then, it was one of the first games where a main character dies, and you get some subtle kind of foreshadowing that this is going to happen. If you're paying attention, it might not surprise you too much. But yeah, she dies, and it's one of the first games, not one of the first games where characters die, because some characters die in Final Fantasy VI, and I'm sure other games outside of Final Fantasy. But like, this is a prominent main character. She dies trying to save the planet, save you. She has got, regardless of whether you think it's a romantic relationship or not, she has a very deep relationship with Cloud, and you being the player, you're kind of projecting on Cloud, and she dies, and it's heartbreaking. I can't sum up the scene better than what you just did, so I'm not even going to try. But I can't help but feel that when Final Fantasy VII and Square was like, we're doing this, we're going to be this ballsy to kill this character, the rest of the gaming world saw it and was like, they just went there. They just killed the main character, and it was okay. And it opened up narrative doors to be like, okay, it's okay to have characters die that you put this much time and energy in, and really changed the world as far as like emotional storytelling and character death within a video game. There's no way it didn't. It is powerful. And yeah, there's a lot of talk about remake, about knowing that scene is going to happen, quote unquote. We'll see if it actually does, because we've seen that they're not afraid to make changes. But yeah, it's a powerful scene. And then, they spend the rest of the game trying to stop Sephiroth, to honor what Aerith did. Aerith is with the party and brought up throughout it. There's a couple of different times where they talk on Highwind about her being gone. They talk about her at the end of the game. There's even a glimpse of Aerith, a little flash where she's helping the party through the live stream fight off Meteor at the end. It's a whole thing. It's not even that she's forgotten about or not talked about. Everyone is kind of grieving Aerith in their own way. And hell, even in the cutscene, shortly after you beat Genova, depending on the party member you have in, they react differently to Aerith's death. Each one does a different reaction. Tifa has a really tender moment where she like gets down and she actually like touches Aerith's face, I think, and like Barrett does like the hand on your shoulder. Yuffie runs off crying because she can't handle it. I don't know. They did that scene so well, and Aerith is such an important character, and yeah, I can't say any more about it. I feel like I want to say we're spending too much time talking about it, but we're not. It's a great scene.
And not only is it a great scene, but as you said, dude, it is an important scene for gaming for the reasons you said. Because like Final Fantasy IV, they killed characters, but they always jebaited us where everyone dies, but they come back later and they help you out in these critical moments, and like they just, jebait you the whole game. But 7, like, you can't play that character anymore. She is dead, but she's not forgotten, and she's still having a large impact on the story and how the rest of the events play out for the game, because she sort of becomes, for definitely Cloud's inspiration for continuing, because now it somewhat turns into, like a little revenge on the side type thing. And it's really what I think kind of just kept everything together was everyone's so disgusted by his actions. It sort of like reaffirmed their mission and their goals. And they're like, yes, we have to continue and beat him now, if not for us, but for Aerith and for the planet, so that her sacrifice wasn't in vain. Because, she knew she was going to die, and she was willing to die to save the planet and everybody on it, because that's just the kind of person she was. And, Squaresoft having the humongous balls, Mr. Soft. I guess not Mr. Enix. It was Mr. Soft at the time.
He hadn't evolved into his second stage at that point from Mr. Soft to Mr. Enix.
Yeah, he hadn't evolved into his next Pokemon evolution. He was Mr. Soft, which isn't quite as powerful as Mr. Enix. But anyways, I digress. You know, he gave the okay. I mean, I don't know if he actually gave the okay, you know, like it was something, but whatever. But anyways, Square was just like, let's do this. Let's rock everybody's world and see what happens. Because that's what Final Fantasy kind of always seems to me, where they're always pushing against the barriers of what's accepted right now in video games. And that's why I think they're so constantly evolving, and why whoever you ask, you get like a wildly different answer on what their favorite Final Fantasy is and what their least favorite Final Fantasy is, because there's so many different flavors for everybody. And Final Fantasy is constantly pushing the envelope. And they pushed it crazy enough in 7 to kill off such an important character. Like, they were building her up through the Temple of the Ancients and all that, to where you're like, oh, dang, man, she's literally talking to the planet. She's our key to figuring out what's going on and how to stop Sephiroth. And then they just take that from you. Like, within a few hours later, they just snatch her from you. And you kind of feel lost as a player, because you're like, well, I just lost my best healer. No other character in the game mechanically is as strong with magic as her, unless you like get a bunch of magic sources or whatever. But so mechanically, you lost your magic user. Everybody else is like subpar or garbage at it. She was kind of the one driving the direction of the party, as like, hey, where are we going next? And, you know, yeah, it's always Sephiroth, but it's always, hey, Aerith, why don't you go peep your dead ancestors and find out where we should go? So now you just kind of feel lost. Like, where do we go now? And like, you kind of feel that as you get out onto the northern continent and you're wandering in the snow, and you're just like, you don't know. Like, you don't know where you're going. You're just like, let me just find somewhere to go, because you don't even know. Like, there's no dialogue saying, hey, let's head over to Icicle Inn next. You're just like, I have to go north. And you're like, okay, well, how do I get north? They not only make you feel the loss within battle, they make you feel lost. And it's just crazy how they've been able to capture that and capture it so well. It's like lightning in a bottle almost, because it's never going to happen again, in my opinion. And to the point where it still influences so many people and games to this day. And it's had this long of a cultural impact on everything, in mostly JRPGs. And it's still so relevant of a game that the community got together and cried loud enough that we got it fully remade.
Part of it anyway, but we're getting there.
Yeah, okay. Part of it's remade. We're still waiting on the others.
Oh, man. But yeah, it's such a powerful game. But there's two things I want to touch on. And I feel like you brought both of them up, but I want to circle back to them because we are slowly running out of time.
Oh, geez. Oh, my God. Time flies when we talk about Final Fantasy VII.
Right? So two things. You mentioned the music in the scene with the materia dropping, and it tings right across the floor, and that Aerith theme comes across. So let's talk about the music in 7.
It's so good.
Most of my favorite tracks from Final Fantasy VII, or from Final Fantasy period, are in Final Fantasy VII. Now, there's a couple of exceptions, being that actually my favorite song from any Final Fantasy is not actually from 7. It's Liberi Fatali from 8, because that song is just... But you've got, you know, bombing mission is great. The intro and the bombing mission leading into each other is fantastic. One Winged Angel, I mean, come on. Like, that is the best villain song ever.
Oh,
like
easily. Nothing's come close.
At least for me. You know, again, we're not, you know, people out there have different opinions. But for me, One Winged Angel, come on. Like, so good.
It's so good. There's a reason it's been covered a billion times.
Yes. I personally love the music for Genova. Again, you've got the creepiness to it in there. The music that plays in the City of the Ancients, that weird synthy music, I love that track. I love how many tracks are really kind of creepy and have that horror aspect. You know, there's that scene when you get to Junon where he's like talking to whomever the character is in his head before he wakes up to ask Tifa about why they didn't spend time with each other when he, quote unquote, went back to Nibelheim. And you get that creepy, like, I can't even recreate it, but there is a creepy track that plays during that. I think it's called Who Am I or something. Look it up. It's creepy. I love it. I love how much creepy music is in 7.
Yeah, there's a lot of songs in it that I actually don't know the name of because I'm terrible with music. And I normally don't really care much about music and video games. That's definitely more Tyler's department than mine, as he is the musician and I am literally tone deaf. But Seven's music speaks to me on another level where it transcends my tone deafness, and I just love it.
Yeah, the music in 7 is phenomenal. Phenomenal. Wow. And it's just great. Like I listen to that OG soundtrack quite a lot. It's super good. And even beyond the individual tracks being good, where they are within the game itself are super good and super relevant. There's a couple of tracks that I don't like, or if it plays too long, I'm like, I gotta mute the TV. And with the big one most recently being that song.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Junon, the song that plays the president's song. Oh my god.
Yeah, dude. The marching band music. It's so bad.
It's so bad.
And it plays for like 20, 30 minutes straight, and you're like, want to jam pencils in your ears, and you're like, dude, oh my god, why? Like, this is like a 3-minute song. Just give me something, anything else.
Yeah, and like, it's good for like an inauguration type imperialistic song, but it's like, I can't do that song for that long. It is rough. But the last thing I want to talk about to kind of segue out of Final Fantasy VII before we close things out is Cloud. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Cloud because, again, I don't want to go too much into the other games and spoil too much, but Cloud is...
just a little bit?
By all rights, shouldn't have been the protagonist of Final Fantasy VII when you look at it. Like, at least in my opinion, like, you've got Zack, who was this whole the backstory, and you learn more about it in Crisis Core, but, like, it wasn't Cloud who did all these things that you find out later that he's talking about. You spend most of the game finding out that all of these things Cloud said he did, he didn't. It was another character named Zack, his best friend, for all intents and purposes. And Cloud took those memories and said he did them. So it very easily, had even one thing gone differently, Zack could have been continuing this story from the beginning and carrying it out all the way through. But it wasn't. It was all thrust on Cloud, and Cloud did not. Cloud eventually rises to the occasion, but it's not like he rose to the occasion and that's how our story started. Cloud doesn't rise to the occasion until much later. Cloud spends most of the story thinking he's this weird amalgamation of himself and Zack and memories from Tifa, and you find out that Cloud was experimented on with Genova cells, and he had Mako poisoning, and Cloud's dealing with PTSD on top of it, and Cloud's a very... And it's a hard line because it's tough to find the line between Cloud is the way he is because of experimentation, PTSD, all of these things, but Cloud is very sick. Cloud is that guy that are sick. Cloud is not right. And
Cloud are sick.
Cloud are sick. That's the name of the episode. Cloud are sick. We got it.
Oh my god, it's like some garbage Toys R Us slogan. Cloud are sick.
But Cloud's not okay. He's and again, this isn't the first time in video games where we see a character struggle with mental illness. We were even talking with somebody in Discord about that, and they brought up another couple of examples. And even 6 has some kind of touchings about mentally ill or depressed characters. But man, does 7 take it to a different area. I mean, later in the game, you're literally Tifa in Cloud's subconsciousness trying to repair his memories. And Cloud's personality changes after you find out.
If only it was that easy in real life.
Right? It's just you sit down and get plugged in, and the therapist holds a controller and just goes through. And it's just like, yeah, here we go. This is some of that good.
Could you imagine you just get hooked up and your therapist plays you like a video game? I would pay for that. Yo, make sure you delete all those repressed childhood memories and all those shame moments I think about at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep. Just go ahead and delete those, please.
And we're making light, but mental illness is a serious thing. And anybody who is out there struggling with any sort of mental illness, please seek the appropriate help and take care of yourself. We are not doctors. But Cloud spends most of the game not who he thinks he is. And even when he puts his memories back together with the help of his friend, and in that sequence, you find out that Tifa is not the friend she thought she was. You find out that Tifa ignored him and they were in different groups, and Cloud was the outcast and always trying to prove himself because he liked Tifa and wanted to prove himself. But before that, Cloud was traumatized. He's a very broken person. And then when he wakes up and comes back and he is himself, he's got motion sickness that he suddenly has that he had even before. And it's kind of a callback. And Cloud is awkward. And it's like, is basically a teenager in an adult's body because these 5 years were experimented in coma, and it's like a 16-year-old in a 21-year-old's body, and he's kind of goofy, and he says things like, let's mosey, and he's just kind of an awkward dude.
Let's mosey.
He's an awkward dude, and this cold, aloof protagonist who's like, I'm all about the money, and this rivalry with Sephiroth, and fated foes, and pay me, and all of that, like, he was just some cool guy trying to be cool, and that wasn't really Cloud. And 7 does a great job of also showing, like, oh, even though Cloud kind of puts himself back together with help and he takes on Sephiroth and he wins, Cloud's still not okay. And again, I don't want to dive into the other media in all of this, but you see in Advent Children and On the Way to the Smile that Cloud is still very depressed and struggling with his identity. And not just that, but racked with guilt over not being able to have saved Aerith. And her death is still affecting him years and years later, as it should. You know, this isn't a game or a source of media where it's just like, oh, this one thing happens and everything's okay. No, like, Cloud's not okay. And
this is not Disney.
Most of these people, in fact, are not okay. And it's very powerful. Cloud is my favorite protagonist because of the way he's portrayed and the way that's handled. And again, it's another example of how they take tropes and put them on, turn it upside down in this game. Cloud is just, I love Cloud. Cloud's super great. I can't wait to see. And it's great playing Remake because you're seeing all of these things. They portray Cloud in such, not new because Cloud's still very much Cloud, but because of the way we can portray things in 2021 with just voice acting alone and more punched up dialogue and stuff like that. I see all these things and I'm just like, I see it. I know what they're doing and I know Cloud's going to struggle and he's doing that cool guy thing, but that's not who you are. That's not who you are. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to see.
Yeah. He's like that a person who, they hate themselves so much that he no longer wants to be who he is. He felt like he failed Tifa more than one time with, the bridge falling out when they were kids. And then when he returned to Nibelheim as the grunt, he felt he failed Tifa. And he never made it to Soldier First Class or Soldier at all. He felt like he was living a life of failures. And then through the events of, Zack retelling his life story to him, he subconsciously must have hated himself so much that he just took those stories and like, this guy is so awesome. This is the guy I want to be, that he made himself that person because he hated himself so much. And it kind of turns into Cloud accepting himself for his faults, recognizing his failures and forgiving himself so that he can be him. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and the Cloud is a person very much, unfortunately, in his eyes for a long time, even after 7, is defined by his failures. He doesn't just fail Tifa, he fails to save Aerith, and he fails Aerith, at least in his eyes, a couple different ways leading up to her death. He gets possessed, quote unquote, by Sephiroth. He fails the party. He gives Sephiroth the black materia. Cloud is very much a person who defines himself by his failures for a long time. And not to say that it's completely understandable, because these aren't just like simple failures like, oh, I forgot to pick up some groceries on the way home. Like, Cloud has massive failures where people die and he inadvertently causes the almost destruction of the planet. But Cloud very much defines himself by his failures and is racked with guilt for a long time for that. And it's very different. You don't have this silent protagonist who's just like, I am going to do this and I always know right and wrong. Like, Cloud's not like that. Cloud struggles, and it's very great to see even now. And I feel like it helped pave the way for, again, Final Fantasy VII wasn't the first one to do this, but I think it helped pave the way for very dynamic characters instead of, just kind of like tropey one-trick ponies, as far as characters go. We really got dynamic characters across the board.
Oh, for sure.
And, again, we could spend forever talking about 7, and we really didn't even get to dive into all the other characters in 7. It's just the main party because they all have great individual stories. And maybe we need to do a part 2 to this episode. This will be Cloud R. Sick part 1.
I feel it'll happen.
All right, we'll get a Cloud R. Sick part 2 with no date coming up because we do have a couple of things I want to touch on coming up down the works that we're very excited about to kind of close out this episode. So by the time this episode comes out, well, I mean, it's already June, but by the time this episode comes out, it'll be like Intermission has just released. So pretty much all of June, maybe even into July, is gonna revolve around Final Fantasy VII in some way, shape, or form. So buckle up, everybody, because the next time we record, we will probably be talking about the PS5 upgrade, Intermission. We will have our hands on it and playing it. There'll be a lot of talk about that. We also...
a lot of talk.
Yeah. We are very excited because one of the things we want to do is we're going to be talking about Remake coming up. We're going to have an episode where we dive into our thoughts about Remake after we both replay it. But not just that, but Remake was pretty divisive in the community as far as what people expected, what they wanted, and then what we got. And I don't want to spoil any of that because I am trying to make this episode as Haney safe as possible. But Remake was pretty divisive, and we're going to bring on a guest who, so far, they haven't finished it, but I don't feel like their opinion is going to change. But we're going to be bringing on a guest who did not like Remake and has some pretty strong thoughts about it. And we're going to talk with him about those thoughts. And then we have another guest that we're going to bring on who loved Remake and loved the ending and loves the direction they're going. And we're going to talk about that as well. We're not going to like debate with them or anything, but we want to bring on these voices you may not have even heard within the community because they're either not a part of the community or they're more of a quiet voice within the community. But we want to bring these people on and talk about what they love, what they didn't love, and kind of hear it from both sides and talk about that. I think it's going to be really great. I'm really excited for that. That's kind of one of our first, when we started the podcast, one of the things we wanted to talk about and accomplish. And I'm really excited that we're going to have that coming up soon.
Yeah, it's like our first dream of the podcast is on the horizon for us. So we're getting pretty amped for it, especially since I haven't played the Remake since launch, and now once it comes on PS5 I'll be replaying it in its entirety, probably like 2 or 3 times. So I'm going to be coming in with some fresh memories, ready to talk.
With all that being said, and I want to highlight that I'm actually very excited for him to replay it because I've replayed the game multiple times. I have a 5-year-old who boots up chapters randomly, and I'm constantly redoing parts of the game. He has not. I'm very excited to get his take after so long because you were a little divided on Remake for a while there, and even in parts probably still so.
I was.
Don't want to dive into that, but I'm very excited for him to finish that and for us to talk about it again. But for now, I want to highlight a couple of things. The music, intro and outro music has changed, but again, it is being provided by Chocobo Band. They are wonderful and gracious. Please check out their website and Spotify, buy their music. They are fantastic musicians covering Final Fantasy music in a great way.
It's so good.
Also, please check out the First Encounter podcast. They are our wonderful friends, and Chris is our gracious audio editor. Please give him your money if you want audio edited in any shape or form. They recently beat Sephiroth.
Bow down to him.
And Haney beat the game of Final Fantasy VII, which is why this episode is quote-unquote Haney safe. And please check out their podcast. They are great. And aside from that, if you are enjoying what you're hearing from us, please, give us a shout out on Twitter. Get in this podcast player of your choice and subscribe, review, like us, or just get on social media and come talk to us. Feyerbrand, tell us also a little bit about...
Help out our algorithms.
Yeah, help out our algorithms, please. We need those. But Feyerbrand, tell us what you're doing with the Final Fantasy Odyssey. We made like a heavy-handed Odyssey comment earlier in the episode, and then we're going to follow it up on it an hour later.
Oh, yeah. So I have embarked on an Odyssey called the Final Fantasy Odyssey, where my goal is to get the Platinum Trophy on every single Final Fantasy title available on PlayStation consoles, which includes different regions. So that's like Final Fantasy 15 5 different times, Final Fantasy 10 10 2 twice for the PS3 and the PS4. It's totaling, as of current, without any new games that we may be seeing at E3, currently about 1,500 trophies and something like 3,000 hours is the estimate to platinum all of these games. This is also going to include Final Fantasy XIV, which I don't know if anybody's seen the 14 list for the PS5, the trophy list. It is expansive and it's going to require a lot of grinding. So we can probably bump that up another couple 3,000 hours pretty easily. So, but this is my goal with no end date that I stream now exclusively just on my YouTube channel. I no longer stream on Twitch, and my YouTube will be linked in our description, so you can come check me out. I do basically all Final Fantasy content. It's basically this, but without Tyler. So it's not even half as good, but
oh my God,
it's what I do.
You're too kind. You're too kind. Thank you. But yes, hit us up on social media at Magus Brothers, or I am Albatross Hill on Twitter. We also have Feyerbrand on Twitter. I believe he is also Feyerbrand on YouTube.
Yep.
But until our next episode, where we will dive into some of that juicy greatness from intermission, we hope you all have a wonderful evening, day / morning, whatever time it is that you're listening to this episode.
Have a good one.